Welcome back to We Need to Talk with Dr. Darcy Sterling, where I give you the tools and skills you need to love better so you can live better. Dating in the digital age is a completely different game than it used to be. Swiping left and right, ghosting, breadcrumbing, and situationships. These have all become part of the millennial love landscape. But with so many choices, why does it sometimes feel like finding a meaningful connection has become even more difficult? Today, I'm joined by Lindsey Metselaar, host of the podcast We Met At Acme, where she covers millennial dating and relationships. Lindsey has her finger on the pulse of today's dating culture, so let's get into it. Lindsey, thank you so much for joining me. So online dating offers endless options, which can give people decision paralysis, which is where you have so many options that you somewhat become incapable of making a choice because you feel a little paralyzed and overwhelmed by all of that. That is something that my clients are always struggling with when they're online dating. So my question is, were things better before online dating? And what's your advice on how to bypass that paradox of choice that comes from having too many options?
I think they were better and also worse. I think it depends on the kind of person that you are. So for people who are not as social, I think online dating is a godsend. And then for people who are always social, I don't think it really makes a difference either way. It's just a helpful tool. But I definitely think having all of these choices, it's the same thing for packing for a trip. If you're going to pack 3 different dresses for a trip, you're going to get to the trip and you're not going to know which one to wear. But if you only have one dress, you're going to wear the shit out of it. You're going to style it. You're going to make it look amazing, you know? And so I think having all these choices, it leaves us a little paralyzed of what to do and if we're making the right decision, which is why people give the dating apps such slack.
And so what is the workaround that you suggest people use for that overwhelm that comes from so many choices?
I think that you have to get to the in-person ASAP when it comes to dating apps because you really only know if you have a connection with someone face to face. And there's so many single friends of mine on dating apps who are so quick to judge, like, oh, he only said hi, or, she's wearing sunglasses in all of her photos. And it's like, okay, but maybe she's not an expert in curation. And maybe he doesn't have game that would probably be a little suspect if he was so good at. So why don't you go in person and see if there's a different energy?
So you don't necessarily use the amount of choice to whittle down because if you were going to use that criteria, wouldn't you be going on dates with every person that interacted with you, whether they, DM'd you sup or, wear a hat and sunglasses and could arguably get away with an armed robbery because they're unrecognizable?
Yeah. Well, I think that men and women use dating apps differently. I feel like men use dating apps strictly physical, like, am I attracted to this person? And women actually look at what's being said on their profile and they're like, oh, was this funny? Or, oh, he also likes seeing movies on Friday nights. Whereas men are using it kind of the same way that they date in real life. They're like, am I attracted?
And so when somebody is very brief in their interactions, like, how would you then even decide who to discard and who not to? Are you saying to, like, go on first dates with everyone you match?
No, but I mean, you can have an exchange, like 3 exchanges back and forth, and you can tell if someone's like a weirdo and someone that you shouldn't go out with versus someone who just seems like a normal, nice person. Like I always say to friends of mine and single listeners of mine, would your guy friend or girlfriend, depending on what you're interested in, have a similar profile to this person? And if they would, they're probably normal. And if it's so different than what your friend of your desired gender would do, then maybe they're not for you.
I think that's fair. One thing millennials are sometimes criticized for, which I think is unfair, is the extent to which they seem to struggle with defining relationships, which,
Mm.
by the way, is a tale as old as time. It's not like people were so free with that decades ago. This was always a problem, but it seems to be more of a thing these days, often leaving both partners very ambiguous about where they stand and the relationship undefined. What do you think that's all about? And do you think it happens equally with men and women, or do you see it more with one sex?
I think men are more hesitant to define things. I think that that's just historically what it is because in hetero relationships, that's the man's job, right? Is to like lead the relationship to where it's supposed to be. And so they drag their feet knowing that, once I define this relationship, there's no going back. And then we might have to move in together, we might have to get married. Like it just seems daunting. And so it takes a lot for a man to define a relationship, and they really need to feel like they have to nail it down, like have to get this person to be their girlfriend. Otherwise, there's no kind of rush to define things. And I think there's such a big casual dating culture now, especially with Gen Z, that I don't really understand as much because I'm a millennial. And everyone's just so casual all the time that it's almost like loserish to define things with someone. And it's more of a game of like who can be more casual. And then people get hurt.
So there's value, there's social currency in avoiding the label. The person who cares the least has the most power in the relationship dynamic. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
A
and
little
it's
bit?
so dumb. And I wish it weren't the case. And I think that we're changing that and we're putting out movies and TV shows where it's cool to care again and whatever. But that seems to be the case with my younger cousins who are in the dating world. And it's not the norm anymore to be in a defined relationship in your early 20s, let's say.
And do you have any sense of why that's come to be?
I wish I knew. I want to blame TikTok because I feel like that's just like the
We can blame
easiest
it for
thing.
everything.
Right,
We should blame it
exactly.
for all the world problems.
Totally. I want to blame TikTok, but I feel like, and I do feel like TikTok is part of it. There are all these new terms. Like, have you heard sneaky link? Have you heard this term?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
can you
And
tell the listeners what it means?
so sneaky link is like someone you hook up with on the down low. And it's like normalizing all of this terminology, friends with benefits, which has been around for a while, hookup buddy, this and that. And all of it kind of means the same thing, which is like this is casual and I don't really care. And it's just become like very normal. And I wish I could tell you why other than TikTok, but I'm going with let's blame TikTok. I don't know. What do you think, Darcy?
I mean, honestly, I think that every generation really rails against the constraints of the generation that just came right before them. And I just think that so many things have been played out that people are looking for a way to be unique. And there's always been, well, not always, but certainly I'm a Gen X. When I was growing up, the women who had the best game played it cool. We played it cool. I used to date men, was married to a man. So, hearkening back to those days, in same sex relationships, you don't need as much game because there's not the power dynamic and the gender
Totally.
differences.
Hmm.
That's a gross generalization. Please don't come for me and hate because of course there are unique qualifiers to that, as there are for all things. But I think that being that cool girl was really effective, the one who didn't push a relationship. I did not have that, by the way. I was definitely hunting a spouse from the minute I hit 20. That is what I was laser focused on that. I wanted certainty, I wanted predictability, and it's an interesting thing because these are not things that I'm necessarily in need of today. Maybe because I've had a long-term marriage for so many
Right,
years. But
right.
I do think long-winded answer. I think that there has always been currency and value in being that cool girl who didn't need it. And those seem to be the women who lock the guys down faster.
Well, that I agree with. And I think that that's actually a great thing to be someone who doesn't need a man, right? Like that is the goal, is that a man or even a woman into a man's life is an additive, not something that completes you. So that I agree with. And I do see why that hasn't gone away, that one aspect.
And I'm suggesting that there might be a performative quality now to it
Mm.
in, in the younger generation.
And I agree
It's
with that. I think you're spot on. I think that that has been taken too far.
mhm. You know, One of the things I love about your generation and about Gen Z is that there's so much more openness today to different relationship structures and models, polyamory, open relationships. But I worry that people enter these relationship paradigms without really understanding the level of self awareness and the importance of relationship skills that's needed to make them succeed.
Mm.
What are you seeing when it comes to people navigating alternative relationship models?
You know, I gotta be honest with you, I don't really see it working a lot except for in the gay community. And I'm so curious if you have thoughts as well. But my gay friends are very good at navigating these open type relationships and just having total on the table communication. And I think with my straight friends, it can be a lot of one person not wanting something, but lighting themselves on fire to keep the other one warm, you know?
Yeah.
And I see that so often. I also see that with, I have a friend who's a woman, and she was kind of like the third type person in a relationship. And she was always hoping that it would just end up being her. And I think that that, of course, is such a toxic mindset. And I tried to talk her off the ledge so many times, like, you deserve more than this. And then she would talk herself into, no, like, this is what I want. But it's not always the case. So I think that relationships like this, especially in a hetero situation, have to come from being like the woman's idea first, because I feel like too often we get hurt trying to like please a man who might want to have their cake and eat it too.
So my wife is a couples therapist,
Yeah.
and oftentimes she'll be working with a couple, and I'm thinking here mostly about lesbian couples, but this comes up all the time with hetero couples as well, where one, like you said, really wants to open up the relationship and the other is clinging on with white knuckles. And as you
Right.
said so poignantly, like would basically light themselves on fire to stay in relationship and keep their partner warm. And it almost never works if it's not something that both people truly desire, or if
Yeah.
the second person who was slow to enter it or didn't suggest entering it, whose idea it wasn't, doesn't quickly acclimate to it and see the value in it, see the benefits to it. And what I see is I see it as a way for people to keep consciously the story they tell themselves is they want to keep the spark alive. Like long-term relationships are fucking boring. They become boring. There are moments of boredom in long-term relationships. Sex can feel choreographed. Your activities can become predictable. All the good parts of a long-term relationship can become mundane over time. And that doesn't mean that the way to fix it is to exit the relationship. If you just hold still and tolerate that ebb, you will see a flow at some
Totally.
point, especially if you do things about it.
Hmm.
But when people do it to bypass the work of creating a more organic spark, which is to say, yeah, add a third person in between any couple, things are going to spark up. It's
Right.
amazing, but it's not always a good spark. Sometimes,
Hmm.
sometimes before you know it, the house is on fire.
Yeah.
And and that's a real problem. What I think that people really need very well developed relationship skills to make that kind of relationship work, unless both partners have absolutely no jealous tendencies. And what I'm learning in life is that that's the minority of people. That's not the majority of people. Most people, either because it's innate in all of us to be jealous, or because we're socialized as human beings, certainly in the West, to feel protective and scarce around our partner, not wanting to share our partner. I think for most people, that is a very big barrier to it. So unless both people have very well developed relationship skills or like zero propensity for jealousy, it can be difficult, but I have seen it work. I've seen it work
Mhm.
many times, but the people it works with are in mature relationships. They've been together a number of years, more than 5. And they sit with the idea before they act on it.
Right.
They talked about the idea months or years before either one of them acted on it. And then they
Mhm.
were committed to doing the work to support each other, which is going to be their primary partner as they entered into this. And sometimes that involves like a lot of really good and complicated couples counseling.
So true. Yeah. I think it's definitely something that you have to be deliberate about, and you cannot just spring it upon someone.
Would you ever do it?
I think that I would do like a form of it. So I have, and I've been open about this on my podcast before, but like I wouldn't call it a kink, but it definitely turns me on to, have thoughts of my partner with someone else sometimes. I don't know, maybe it is a kink. So because of that, I think it would be extremely beneficial for me had I felt like there was an ebb for a long time. The problem is my partner doesn't really, it's not that he's not into it, but it's like I would be kind of like forcing it upon him,
You
which
literally found the one heterosexual male whose fantasy does not involve his wife watching him have sex with another woman. Well done.
it's so funny. I don't know. He's like a goody two shoes. I don't know what to do with him. I mean, he says he always is like, yeah, I would do it. But then like if there's like a hot waitress one night, I'm like, what do you, he's like, oh no, 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 no. I think that never say never. And I think it's so unhealthy when my friends who are straight couples are, especially the girlfriend, is like, oh my God, no, we can't even look at that woman. I'm like, well, okay. Like, he's gonna look at a woman, we're all human. And like, isn't it much hotter to have him look at a woman and then look back at you and be like, but this is what I want, Like, don't
Mm,
tell him not to look. It's like if you love something, set them free and like they choose, you want to be chosen. You don't want to be forced. And I think that's the worst behaviors is when wives or husbands get super controlling about like, who you can look at and talk to. And that makes you want to look at and talk to others?
yeah, I think it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think that when I went to a high school, I was just talking about this last night. I went to a high school that had like no freedom whatsoever. So you couldn't even, once you got into school, like it felt like a prison. I'm sure it wouldn't feel like a prison had I ever actually been in prison, but to my teenage self and everyone I went to school with, it felt very much like a prison. You went to school from the minute you were in there, you never left the school grounds. If you did, alarms went off, all kinds of things happened. It was really crazy. It felt like lockdown. And because of that, we were climbing the walls. We
Right.
broke every rule imaginable.
Hmm.
Next door to us was a high school that had none of those guardrails up. And those kids got their stuff done. They had a higher rate of going to college than we did. And they managed to have a good time at the same time. And they learned how to be responsible. And I think that for me, I'm not a fan of containing anybody in life. I'm a fan of letting people be whoever they want to be or whoever they're meant to be. And, if that means we remain compatible throughout life, that's amazing and lucky. And if it means that we outgrow each other, then we had a great run.
Right.
I would never want to dial somebody down for them to remain in a relationship with me, no matter what the context of the relationship.
Yeah, I love that. And I couldn't agree more. I think that that's the key to a healthy relationship.
We Need to Talk is sponsored by Mindful Care. You might remember my friend, Dr. Tamir Aldad, from a few episodes back. He just texted to let me know that Mindful Care is now accepting new patients. We all know how hard it is to find an in network psychiatrist without a long wait list, but Mindful Care can see you same or next day for medication management, recovery, and group therapy. No wait. And they take Medicaid, Medicare, and commercial insurance. Visit mindfulcare.com or text or call 516-505-7200 to book your appointment today. When I think of the differences in millennials dating versus Gen Xers dating, one of the most profound differences that I can visually see is the shifting gender roles. Not only the rise in non-traditional relationships, but the reduced societal pressure to get married and to act in accordance with traditional gender roles. Like
Yeah.
women are much more forthright about wanting to participate financially in the dating landscape. What do you see or what do you think has caused such a shift in the gender roles? And do you think it has made things better or more complicated?
Definitely more complicated. I think what has changed is that women have way more rights than we used to. Women are closer to equality, definitely not equal, but closer. And as a result, a lot of my friends who are women in heterosexual relationships are actually more successful than their male partner. And at the same time, they want to be taken care of and they want to feel little and, like safe and all of the things that we traditionally want to feel. But that was a different time where we had to rely on our male partner because we had no income and we had no freedom and we had no voice. And now we have most of those things, yet we still want our man to be the one bringing home the bacon. We still want our guy to be working even harder than us. And so I think it's a tough situation for men right now and women.
I agree with you. And I do, but I think it's fair to say and underscore, it really is a hard time for men right now in the dating landscape. I was at the beach, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks ago, and I was there alone and I saw a group of women struggling with an umbrella. It was a windy day. They couldn't get the umbrella down. And I made eye contact with one of the women and I was like, "You need help?" And she was like, "Yes." So I got up and I got over there and I was thinking, yeah, I'm going to be able to do this. And like, there was no within seconds, I was like, there's no fucking way I am, not only am I not a help, I'm about to be part of the problem because I'm going to get hurt trying to do this. But like 50 yards down, there's some guy sitting on a towel alone. And I'm like, we got to get this guy over here.
Right.
And so I flag him down. And as I'm flagging him down, the woman whose umbrella it is that we're trying to close says, "I've been making eye contact with this guy for like a minute and a half now. He's not coming over. What the hell's wrong with him?" And I was like, well, let's not reprimand him as he's getting up and walking towards us because we actually need his help.
Right.
He comes over and she launches into a reprimand, even though I had just she didn't know that I think I know everything about dating and relationship skills. She was a stranger and knew nothing about me. So as he approaches, she starts reprimanding him. And the guy looks at us and he was like, "Honestly, I saw you struggling." Because she says, "You see me struggling. Why don't you get up and help? This woman over here has to help." And he says, "Honestly, I didn't want to be accused of mansplaining and I wasn't sure what to do." And I saw that decision paralysis happen to him and I felt for him. I completely understood. I feel like men don't know where they belong in society right now.
It's so true. But I think the bottom line is that we still need men for silly things like that. And we still need men for, feeling safe and feeling protected. And I recently went on the subway with my son and his stroller, which is huge. And I could not have survived without the kindness of random men on the subway. And I didn't wait for like someone to come up and help me. I would find a man and I'd be like, hey, you, can you help us get this stroller up the stairs? Or can you help get the stroller down or whatever? And not one man said no. And I think that men still want to be useful like that.
They do. They do. They want to be useful and they want to be helpful. And can I just tell you that literally whenever I am in a subway, I am the stroller queen. Like the number of women that swarm other women and offer to help, like I can't imagine walking past someone and not offering to help, especially somebody who's like a mom with like a 10-year-old, because they know what it's like. They know what it's like to have to navigate the subways and the stairs and all that stuff. And that's a nightmare. That said, it's really complicated. It is absolutely complicated. I get it. I get that men don't know where their place is. I totally do. And I feel for them. And there is a place for them. And we still do have to, we have to register and acknowledge that there is a difference in physical strength. And yeah, they're very, very needed. And, we're grateful for it when they're helpful. Technology, even though it's so convenient and it's part of everything we do, can make connections so much more difficult, leading to misunderstandings and shallow interactions, especially when it comes to text messaging and DMing people. What's your workaround for that? What do you tell people to help them navigate the misunderstandings, misattunements that come from text messaging and using technology instead of speaking directly to each other?
It's hard. I mean, it's really hard to know someone's tone via text. I think that voice memos are such a good option in dating nowadays. I think that in the beginning they could be a little aggressive, but once know each other's vibe, I think it's okay to send a voice text. I think the phone call is super romantic. But again, I think that you need to get a heads up. I think that you don't just call someone out of the blue. That's like crazy to do nowadays.
It is.
I don't think that we should be communicating on different apps like Instagram DMs and Snapchat unless you are sending funny videos to each other. I don't think it should be a means of communication. I think text, phone call, voice memos, those are all great. And, try to be as clear as possible, knowing that things get lost in translation.
Especially text translation, written translation, right? Because there's no affect.
Right.
So, do you have a personal, guidelines on what you will text and what requires an in-person or a voice memo?
It's so funny. So I have a controversial opinion, and I'm curious what you think. I think that a breakup is fine via text unless you are very serious. But I think if you've been seeing them for 6 dates and you want to break it off, don't make them go meet you in person to be dumped. I mean, why are we wasting people's time nowadays? You know what I mean? Tell me your thoughts, because I feel like I just dropped a bomb on you.
I totally hear that. I wasn't sure where you were going to go with that. I think that 6 dates is not a relationship, and I don't know that. Maybe I'm further into the youth mentality around not having labels on your relation. I would hardly call that a relationship. 6
No,
dates,
but I
even
think
though
even like 3 months, I think breakup line via text is okay.
I think there's a world of difference between a text message and making someone meet up with you. I understand wanting to not inconvenience someone just to have them be dumped. I think you can pick up the phone and have a phone call with the person if they have invested time in a relationship with you. I'm of the belief that the way we end relationships is a big reflection on who we are and what our values and principles are. And I think we need to focus. I think it's really important to end relationships with the same level of respect and thought that we entered them. And I think oftentimes that doesn't happen.
I hear you and I agree with you. I just think that it's really scary to be broken up with over the phone. It's like an ambush. And there's something really sweet about saying your piece and letting someone digest it before they respond to you.
I totally hear that, and I hear the undertone of respect that you intend by that. I don't know if that's how most people would receive it. I don't
Yeah.
know if they would receive it as, "Oh my gosh, Lindsay had so much respect for me. She texted me
Yeah,
instead
yeah.
of ambushing me." And I do think that to a certain extent, life is a series of ambushes. And while I don't ever want people to ambush each other, in fact, whenever we're having serious conversations, I like my clients, my students, my listeners to give their partner, whomever they want to have the serious conversation with, a heads up about what the topic is and that
Right.
they want to have a conversation because they've been sitting there thinking about the topic for hours, days, months, or years. And the person they're speaking to deserves to at least contemplate it for a few minutes before they volunteer to be on the receiving end of that and to
Mhm.
decide how much time they want. But I don't know if most people would track a breakup over text as an olive branch of respect the way you intend it to be.
That's fair. I totally understand that. I think it's just for me, it's like a personal preference, but I agree. Life is a series of ambushes, and I think it definitely builds character to handle an ambush like that.
So you think that if a friend didn't want to be friends with you anymore, you'd rather them text you than to say, "Hey, I want to have a talk with you about,
No,
I
I
want
think
to have a
that's
serious
different.
talk?"
I think that's different because if I imagine if they're saying I want to have a talk, there's still a chance that we could be friends. You know what I mean? Uh,
Mm,
But if the decision is final,
yeah.
then just text me, you know?
Okay, I totally hear that. I totally hear that. Politicians could learn a lot about our differing on opinions so appropriately, right? You
Right,
can
right.
disagree without being a douchebag,
Totally.
turns out. Yeah.
Totally.
So, millennials are delaying marriage, homeownership, and parenthood. How much of that do you think is driven by all the pressures, the financial pressures that, people your age and younger and people my age, I mean, I'm still paying for these. I'm still almost 70,000 in debt for my PhD, and I have been paying since '06. So, how much of the delay in marriage and homeownership and parenthood and the milestones of adulthood do you think is a reflection of coming out of school so in debt and having to have like 5 different jobs or gig economy just to make ends meet versus shifting personal values in whether or not these things matter to you, like marriage, homeownership, and being a parent?
I think it's a mix. I'd say about 50-50. I don't own a home. And any friend of mine who has bought a home has had to have help from their parents, no matter how successful they are in their own right. It is a different world than it used to be. The prices are astronomical. As you mentioned, the debt is out of control that people are experiencing and still climbing out of. And that is really daunting and scary. It's just terrifying to have to make these financial choices. So I think people are opting for like the courthouse wedding. They're opting for, renting versus buying. They're waiting to be parents until they truly feel like they don't need to rely on other people to provide for their kids. And also, technology, thank goodness, has allowed us to be parents later on with egg freezing, IVF, and these options. So I think that all of that leads to, all three things being delayed.
But to what extent do you think there's a decrease in desire for these things? Do you think people your age and younger don't want these things? Or do you think there's just this huge hurdle to overcome now?
I think it's a hurdle. I can really only speak to the people that listen to my podcast and they all want it and they want it badly. And they're just struggling to get it.
I agree with you. That has been my experience as well. I also
Yeah.
think that your generation and younger generations watched Gen X's hustle my generation. And like, there's nothing about it that looks attractive. Like,
Right.
I remember my niece and co host, Ashton, who is now 28, in her early 20s, she admired my work ethic and the extent to which I overworked and was constantly like on, and everything I did was about being productive. And in the last couple of years, I can see like empathy in her eyes when she looks at me. I have since cut back almost by 50%. I am no longer overworking the way I used to. I mean, I work maybe 45, 50 hours a week, which by a lot of people's standards is still overworking, but by what I used to do, it's nothing. I've
Right,
cut it
right.
almost in half. But there was nothing about it that looked attractive to her. Like, it's one thing to do it in your 30s and 40s, but like when you're in your 50s and you're still hustling like a fucking intern, I think there's something legitimately sad about that. And if I was a younger person, I would not want that lifestyle. And when I was younger, I didn't want that lifestyle.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that the younger generations want to work as hard as they've seen Gen X work or, boomers. Is that what we call them?
Yeah. I mean, the ones older than me, yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
it's too, and here's the thing. The irony is that like the boomers, it was still plausible to like work hard and outperform your class. You could get to the next rung if you just worked hard. We've been following the same recipe in my generation, and let me tell you, I am hardcore middle class. Hardcore middle class. That is what I am, and it is what it is. It's where I am. I don't think I'm going to outperform that, and I'm
Hmm.
actually disinterested in it at this point. I really care much more about my relationships and my quality of life and my health, which, by the way, you're lucky to have,
Right.
you know?
So true.
So, millennials are reporting higher rates of loneliness than previous generations, despite having unprecedented access to communication tools. I'm curious if you think the modern dating culture is resulting in a deeper sense of isolation.
Definitely. It is like the, age old debate of technology being good or bad for us. And there are ways in which it really helps us connect. Like, I can't explain to you how wonderful technology is for travel, right? When you're going to Sri Lanka and you put on your Facebook, hey, do I have any friends who are living in Sri Lanka? And then you do, and then you meet up with them. And how amazing is that, right? Or you join a Facebook group of New York tourists in Sri Lanka. But for the most part, it's dividing us because we're just hiding behind our technology.
And back to what you said at the very top, if you're someone who is not very social, this allows you to feel it's almost like we're performing connection
Mm,
instead of actually feeling connected.
right. It's not real.
It's not real. So, how do you manage your access to technology and remaining in relationship with people truly, not in a curated way?
I am very much in my DMs. Like, I speak to, just in terms of on my business account with my followers, I'm always talking to people. Like, that's me. I'm not, outsourcing that to a team. Like, I am talking to people in that way. And then I think on a personal level, similarly, I talk to my friends through technology. I'm not hiding behind it. I'm being very vulnerable and real about what I'm experiencing. Almost probably too vulnerable and showing like this is what we're going through this week and Zachary is not sleeping and this and that and connection is what I use social media for.
So you don't suffer from loneliness yourself.
I don't at the moment, but I have before, and I can see why people do because you're seeing this glamorous life that everyone's leading that may or may not be true. And you're seeing people hanging out without you and feeling left out, and oh, this person had a baby shower, but I didn't get invited, or whatever you see on social media. And it's really easy to go to a place of no one wants to hang out with me. I'm so alone because of what you see.
Speaking of Zachary, you just had a baby. Congratulations.
Thank you.
How has being a parent changed your perspective on relationships And do you think it's influenced the advice that you give millennials who are dating and navigating these areas?
Totally. I did not ever date with parenthood in mind. I was dating like the swaggy, cool guy, and who, if I were probably in labor, wouldn't even answer my texts.
So
And
deep. It's such a problem, but
and
that's so relatable also.
it's so crazy. And now, thank God I married a good one, and he's so wonderful and attentive with our son. But he's the first guy that I thought about as would definitely be a good parent. And so if parenthood is something that you want, when dating, you have to date thinking, could this person be a good dad as well as a good partner to me? And I think that that impacted me a lot because I never would have put that advice into the world before I was on the other side.
So, what are some of the things that you would encourage someone to be thinking about as they're looking for a partner with parenting in mind?
I would say someone consistent, right? Like, or, what we were joking about of responding when we're in labor, like they have to have consistent communication with you. And someone who, has really strong values that align with yours. Like they want to create, a human who's a good person and someone who maybe they have a good relationship with their own family if they're able to. I know things can get complicated and just someone who is like good with beings, like animals and other babies and this and that, and someone who takes care of you. And I'm not just talking financially. Like, make sure you're okay when you're sick or when you seem really sad, is in tune with your needs. And I think all of those qualities can definitely equal a good father, a good parent, someone who has their values in order, I would say is the most important thing.
It sounds to me like what you're looking for or suggesting that the listeners look for is someone who can act in accordance with empathy and attunement because that's what they're going to need if they're going to be a good parent.
Totally. Yes, exactly. Couldn't have said it better myself. That is what's so important. And also someone who doesn't like fight dirty. And I feel like there's still so many people who accept cursing and yelling in fights. And it's not our fault. It's how we were raised most of the time, right? If we were in a yelling or cursing household.
Yep.
But it's a pattern we want to break before we become parents.
It's our responsibility to then break that so that we're not passing it down intergenerationally. Like, not our fault how we wound up this way. It is our fault what we do about it.
Totally. And also, and this ties into therapy, someone who is working on themselves, someone who's actively working on themselves, not like, oh, I'm done and I'm ready to be a parent. No, you're not done and you're never done. And if you're going to be a parent, you're going to have a whole new set of things to work on.
You absolutely are. To that end, how has being a parent impacted the relationship? I mean, newsflash, the research says that it is like I don't know, a 50-pound plate on the backs of each partner when you have a child. It is not going to increase your happiness. It increases your stressors, diminishes your resources. How has it been for you guys?
Yeah, it's so hard. And the beginning was almost impossible because I hated my husband in the beginning. I was so tired all the time. I was breastfeeding. There was nothing he could do because I was like, the one I will always be the primary parent. But then it was even worse because he couldn't even feed our child.
You were the food source.
I was everything. And I just had so much resentment towards him getting 8 hours of sleep every night. Like, who does he think he is? Anytime he would suggest, like, oh, we should probably give our kid, I'd be like, zip it. You have no say. You are over there sleeping. And it was really hard for me to like him again. It took a little while. And it's so funny because we have such a wonderful relationship. So I can't even imagine already having existing issues and then just trying to add a band-aid baby. Like that is a disaster. And so we've kind of come through and are just so happy now and have our groove, but it does not make it easier. It definitely doesn't, at least when your kids are babies, you know? And it's funny, Michelle Obama made did an interview once and she said, I hated Barack for the first
For
10
10
years. Yeah.
years,
For
like,
the first 10
right?
years after we had kids. And I remember hearing that before I had kids, being like, that seems a little long. And now I'm like, no, that makes full sense. I can't believe it was only 10.
When she said that, it really underscored for me, we have to just be more transparent about how hard these relationships are.
Mhm.
You know, and I appreciate your integrity in being that transparent that you guys have gone through a really tough time and are coming out the other side. You know, when you have a baby or when you don't have a baby and you just have a marriage and the marriage is your baby, you need a tribe. You need a tribe of people who can support you through that entire process. And you know, I hope you know that I'm a resource for you and I'm a friend of
Thank
yours.
you.
And let me know how I can support you because you're going to go through ebbs and flows, and you can you can text me and be like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna take you up on that, and I will be there for you.
Thank you. That means a
You're
lot.
you're so welcome. Thanks for carving out the time for me today.
Of course, this was so much fun.
We Need to Talk with Dr. Darcy Sterling is a Sterling Standard production. Editing and sound engineering is by Bart Migal. Our theme music is by Trending Music. Special thanks to Amanda Christiani and Preston Smith. If you have a millennial in your life, show them some love and share this episode with them. We'll be back on Tuesday with another episode packed with the relationship, dating, and mental health hacks you've come to expect.